Welcome and morning, everyone. I'm not sure where everyone's calling from, but we're having a really beautiful morning here on Vancouver Island, on Coast Salish territory. I'm a settler here on the island. I've been here about 13 years, and so grateful to live here and work here at the University of Victoria. So as Jessica mentioned, I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Geography, so a lot of my work's been focused on working with communities. So I do community-based research. I've been using a lot of arts-based engagement, so participatory video in particular, and I'll speak a little bit to some of that work later on here. So yeah, I'm just delighted to be involved in this series, and I know Bud Hall will be speaking, I think, in August, more specifically to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So I will try to complement his work, and also Steve and Martin, who I just listed the other day. So I thought I'd just give a little bit of a contextual framing for my talk today. So I'll speak a little bit about knowledge democracy and some of the theoretical underpinnings of this work. And then I'll speak to some of the global trends in higher education and community-based research, particularly around creating positive social change, as the title is here. And then I'll speak really briefly just to a few of our UNESCO Chair global projects. One is Community University Research Partnerships, Global Perspectives we did a few years ago, and then another big project called the Next Gen Training in CBR, just to give a little bit more information about that. And then I'm going to focus on 3 different case studies. One was an impact assessment I did at UVic, looking at the impact of community-engaged research over about 6 years. And then 2 other large global projects that are participatory, community-based, focused on waste management, and one also in water governance from Ghana and South Africa from some work I did recently with UBC. So I'll try and keep check of any questions as they come up as well. So I just wanted to start today's talk, and sorry if I am looking over at my other screen and I have some notes. Hopefully that's not too disturbing. So I just wanted to begin by just talking a little bit about our changing understanding, or the need to have a shift in how we understand knowledge, and who creates knowledge, and how knowledge is produced, and what knowledge is used for. So I know many scholars, including Bud Hall and John Gaventa, Orlando Falls-Borda, many participatory researchers that have followed scholars such as Paulo Freire, for example, have really helped us understand the changing nature of knowledge, and using knowledge, or valuing knowledge, from a number of different epistemologies. So this ecology of knowledge, as some say, which is really essential if we are to be working in community-based research, working with communities to actually produce locally relevant knowledge to solve some of local challenges. So this really increasing recognitions that citizens, civil society organizations are also producing very valuable, important knowledge, and that we actually need to be working together across sectors, across disciplines, and certainly outside of the university, to be thinking of how to work together to solve some of these big issues that we're seeing now, such as the UN Sustainable Development Goals call to action. This is also part of a broadened call for valuing Indigenous ways of knowing and being, and institutions are now being called at all levels to think about decolonization of knowledge within our institutions, and particularly in Canada in terms of addressing reconciliation, but we're seeing this as a global phenomenon as well. So really this co-creation of knowledge between community and academia has undergone quite a dramatic shift in the last 10 to 20 years. I've added just a few books here. One is the Global University Network for Innovation, and those who aren't familiar with this network, they're fantastic, based out of Barcelona, and they produce a World Report in Higher Education every 2 years, really bringing together global leaders to speak about topics that are important in higher education. I think the last 3 or 4 reports have been really focused on this change in university towards a socially responsible university, engaged university, how universities are addressing particularly SDGs was their most recent report. So we're really seeing this international momentum to change university culture, to change policies and practice, to advance community engagement in research, but also in learning. We're seeing a huge move in universities to support experiential learning, which is very much part of this engaged university. We're also seeing a lot of new networks that have really been focused on community engagement in higher education. So some of them, Guni I mentioned, the Talwars Network, Asia Engage, Clace is from Latin America, excuse me, Mayan Arab Network. So really we're seeing many new, within the last 10 years, regional networks focused on higher education and community engagement. We're also seeing more journals, such as Engaged Scholar here in Canada, Research for All based out of the UK, and journals now also having community as peer reviewers on those reviewing boards, which is really exciting to see and really kind of demonstrates this idea, this concept of knowledge democracy, as we're seeing more inclusion of community in the dissemination of knowledge, as well as more open source from tri-councils and government funding that is supported, must be now open source. So there's this move towards open source, and citizen science as well, I think, which is a broadening field within maybe more natural sciences and other physical sciences. So we're seeing this call both within the community, but also from governments, funding agencies, foundations, have all been moving towards this architecture of partnership research and collaborative partnerships. We could say that, in almost every university, certainly across Canada, there's some form of structure that now supports community university engagement, whether that's a centralized office or a person dedicated to be thinking about that at the university level. And certainly we're seeing engaged learning being integrated at various levels within universities as well. I think it's very safe to say that CBR is accepted as a rigorous approach to research. I know Martin Taylor spoke about this a little bit in the previous webinar, speaking to the research excellence tool as a way to demonstrate impact, but also thinking about process and partnership. So that was a very good webinar. If you did miss that one, to go and have a listen. So yeah, CBR is really quite accepted now, more than it was, and see it as an approach to respond to with community, working closely with community to produce locally contextualized and culturally appropriate, context-specific, place-based processes to respond to challenges. One way that this is being measured on a global scale, and we're seeing more and more interest in this from universities and regional innovation as well, is to think about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And I know Bud will speak specifically to this, but one way to implement these goals is through community-based research. I think that's a very good and effective approach to be working at that level. So I'll just mention briefly for those that aren't familiar with some of the knowledge products that we've produced over the years. So I've been working with the UNESCO chair, Bud Hall and Rajasthan, for a number of years as one of their research directors. And this book here, the Strengthening Community Research Partnerships Global Perspectives, is really kind of one of the only kinds of studies that have been done that have looked at the different institutional structures and policies that are supporting engaged research from around the world. And so that involved a global survey, and we did 12 country case studies, and within each country profiled 1 to 2 universities as well as community-based organizations to look at how they are structuring and being supported to engage in mutually beneficial reciprocal relationships and collaboration. So lots of different diverse structures and models. So I encourage you to have a look at that. Canada is one of the countries profiled there, as well as the United States. Here we don't have the list, but we've organized them in 2 different tiers, ones that have really strong national policies and frameworks, and then ones that are emerging. We also have a very good institutional handbook that goes along with this for those that want more of a practical user guide. So these are all available on the UNESCO Chair website. Everything is open source, so please share. What is an example of a strong country for CBR from your research? Well, certainly Canada. We've seen quite a few examples from across the country here. I think Canada is a great example of universities really integrating engaged research within their strategic frameworks and as well within the department and faculty levels. So I definitely encourage you to have a look at the Canadian one, but there's also very strong engaged universities in Ireland, campus engaged, in the UK, in the States, but also Brazil, India. So quite a few there that I encourage you. I won't go too much in detail about those ones now. And I'll speak quickly just to the second, our second, no problem, Allison, our second project. So what we found in that first research partnerships project was there was a real need for training in community-based research. That many that do CBR have mostly learned to do it in the field. There's been few opportunities to be formally trained in community-based research, and CBR that's been provided at the university level has been often very theoretical. And then, of course, we know community-based research has been happening in community for a long time. But then, of course, that's very practical. So to have the practical and theoretical kind of come together was seen as a real gap in this area. And so this next project we had funded by SSHRC, building the next generation of community-based researchers. And this is a wonderful study. Again, we produced a book looking at different case studies. So there's 21 cases in this book from around the world, looking at where CBR training is happening and what that training kind of looks like. And we had 4 different thematic areas, one being water governance, which I was closely affiliated with there. So I also encourage you to have a look at knowledge and engagement as well. It comes with a user guide that's quite user-friendly. Just looking at the time here, keep moving through. So just briefly wanted to also mention a new initiative, and I'm pretty sure Bud will speak to this next month, but it's called the Knowledge for Change Consortium. So I'll just mention it really briefly here, kind of as a continuing to strengthen capacity for training. This is a global initiative, so the creation of training hubs around the world in different countries. A training hub is a partnership between a university and a civil society organization, and who would then take a mentor training program. So mentors from those hubs would be trained in a 21-week course, learning the theoretical and practical. So there's a field course involved, which would then produce training materials at their hubs in different countries in their own languages, in their own culturally appropriate ways, which is very exciting to think of CBR being locally adopted in those ways, and as part of a global network that we will be sharing resources and information together. So we have training hubs already being started in India, Indonesia, Italy, South Africa, Colombia, and Cuba. So those are the first cohort that just went through. And now the second cohort is coming up in August. And so we'll be setting up hubs in Canada, UK, Brazil, and Spain. So this is another exciting initiative to follow. So I'll just speak to three case studies that I think may be interesting to give some more examples of CBR as an avenue, as a tool for creating positive social change. One is an institutional impact assessment that I did at UVic in 2016. So for those of you that might not be familiar with University of Victoria, there's quite a strong institutional commitment to support CBR. Over the years, we've had different structures at the university. So I looked at an assessment of two structures between 2009 and 2015, and then also looked at a number of different indicators, such as funding, number of students, other reputational indicators as well. So we have quite a large contingency of scholars, or those that would identify as community engaged scholars, about over 150 at the University of Victoria. So what I found in doing this research, and which isn't surprising for many of you working in this area, is that there's such a diversity and spectrum of the typology of engagement that is across the campus, let alone across the world. There's many different ways of describing this kind of work. Just within our own university, we found over 20 different typologies. So this would include action research, participatory, applied research, citizen science, for example. So lots of different ways that that engagement happens in research, and this, I feel, provided a little bit of a tool to bring people together to start having some conversations about the work we're doing, and for folks to see themselves within this this space as well. So we produced a typology for engaged research and engaged learning. Here you'll see some of those key aspects that Martin Taylor referred to the other day in terms of partnerships, design, process, and governance there. And then here you'll see a bit of a spectrum of engagement. So that's a little bit what I'm talking about in terms of low levels of engagement all the way to the co-creation of knowledge there. So this is also available on our website. We also did mapping at our university. So really, it's the first time we've been able to really highlight the different engagement for research and learning across our campus. And we've done that in this interactive engagement map, which we have over 1,300 records now in 85 different countries. So it's been quite exciting to see where we're working, the kinds of research we're doing, which communities we're working with. I think this is going to be very helpful for faculty, but also for community partners to be able to coordinate better in terms of our work. So as I mentioned, the scope of that project was really looking at the outcomes, so doing a bit of a theory of change, outputs, outcomes of those institutional structures. We also wanted to look at how the engaged research at UVic is contributing to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So I used that as a framework and was able to have access to our enhanced planning tool data from each of the 92 academic units. So I did an analysis of the impacts and contributions to society against the UN goals in different levels of impact. So looking at very micro individual behavioral change all the way to systems level change in each of that. So that was quite a big project, but very exciting to see how UVic is having impact in different areas. And then this work has helped to develop an impact rubric for engaged scholarship at our university and producing resources for assessment of promotion and tenure. So just really briefly here, you'll see, here we go, you'll see where those instances of impact align with the UN goals within those different levels. I found over 165 instances within that UPT data. So there's a little bit about the methodology, but there is a full report also available on our website at UVic for those that want to learn a little bit more about the details of that study. So it's not fully exhaustive. It was a pilot, but it's something that we're going to continue to do as a way to think about impact from our engagement. We know that there's huge impact to students that are being involved in engaged research projects, that engaged research and engaged learning really go hand in hand. So the impact to students was something that was quite prominent across the disciplines. And lots of impact in the community in terms of improved services and infrastructure, but also building capacity for research, building capacity for funding applications, these kinds of more organizational level impacts. And then, of course, we know that CBR has huge impact in terms of the quality and relevance of our research. Again, I know Martin spoke a little bit about that, but just thinking that we need this locally contextualized lived experience knowledge married with more traditional academic knowledge, that together this is an important way to move forward. I also found that we need to be really thinking beyond the peer-reviewed journal article. This is no surprise, perhaps, for many of you working in this space, that we know that forms of knowledge are disseminated with high impact and in a variety of different ways, and that we need to be thinking a little bit about how to value those different forms of knowledge in the university in terms of particularly around our collective agreements. So that's something that we've been working a lot on at our university now. So I want to speak just two more case studies that I'm pretty excited to speak about. So I'll speak for maybe another 10 minutes and and I really hope we have some questions. So this is one global participatory project I wanted to share. It's called the Participatory Sustainable Waste Management Project. It was funded by CEDA between 2005 and 2011. We've been able to continue building those networks. So it's working in Sao Paulo, Brazil, with organized and informal waste collectors, particularly those working within cooperatives, but also associations. And the objective of the project was to strengthen the network of those recycling cooperatives to be better integrated into waste management, but also building their skills, their communication, and political agency to participate in policies around waste management. It's a very incredible project. It was one that I started working on when I started doing my master's. So definitely one that I've been involved with personally, passionate about for many years, where I also learned participatory research methodologies as well. We just recently received a shared partnership development grant to continue doing work with these particular groups in Brazil and also in Nicaragua, Argentina, Kenya, and Tanzania. The process is participatory, so the waste recyclers are part of the decision-making process of that project, from allocation of funding all the way to process and dissemination of knowledge. So to see that at such a large scale is quite amazing in terms of thinking about how CBR can be an avenue for positive social change. But also as a possible, and I invite us to think about a possible transformative space through research to build agency and political capacity in those communities. So a lot of the outcomes of that project have really led to the recyclers becoming very strong leaders politically around waste management, and actually seeing policies change to include waste pickers in municipal waste management plans, and even within the national level, when catadores were actually given status as legitimate employment. So these are kinds of examples of how CBR can really be an avenue for real transformative but large-scale change as well. And the next case study I just wanted to share is some research we did recently. I participated with the Water Governance Program at the University of British Columbia, looking at shifting water governance structures in Accra, Ghana, and Cape Town, South Africa. Perhaps some of you have been following the water crisis in Cape Town, which is alarming, to say the least. So our project was a few years ago, so not just recently there, but we were working with informal settlements in those areas. So incredibly challenging infrastructural issues, poverty, social exclusion, within Ghana and in Cape Town, in terms of having access, environmental health, safety. So a lot of challenges in those areas. And our project, my particular part of the program, was using participatory video as a communication tool, as a tool to bring community together. Both those videos are available on the watergovernance.ca website if you wanted to have a look. We then use those videos with local governments in those areas. The one in Ghana in particular was interesting. We had local assembly, government, NGOs, and residents from those from that community in Accra come together to do the participatory video workshop together. And I found when you're bringing all of those stakeholders together right from the beginning of a project, especially within these kind of arts-based engagement, the outcomes are quite impactful. They've now started doing a citizen science program looking at environmental monitoring using the equipment we brought. So pretty exciting to see how community-based research can really be a powerful tool for transformative change for those that are continuing to have political voice in their community, and then also to see changes happening too. Oh, thank you for putting the link up for me there. Okay, just a few final thoughts, and then we'll have some time here. So yeah, I've mentioned a few case studies. I feel when CBR is done right, that it can be a space for social transformation, to build agency and research capacity in the communities to solve some of these local challenges that the ones I've been working on. I'm really excited and quite passionate to use different forms of art and expression with community in my work, and that these are very useful in terms of legitimizing and valuing different ways of knowing, and can really bring forth citizens' own voice in the research. So it's a quite powerful way to share stories, to bring people together around some key issues and opportunities as well. So within the context of the work I've been doing around waste and water, that CBR is really a way to build better decision making that's more informed and possibly locally accepted as well. So what we do need to be thinking about moving forward is having more support for long-term continuity if we really want these engagements to have concrete political and social impact. So really having this long-term partnerships. I know this is also came up in Martin's talk as well. So really moving away from these short kind of just short mini projects, but to be thinking about our community's research embedded in long-term partnerships with a lot of capacity in the community to be working together. We need to be thinking about these power dynamics and often top-down governance, particularly around these highly contested political spaces, such as resource management. And I mentioned briefly from our study that we really need to be thinking of building capacity in the community, within the community organizations, to be doing research, to be leading research. We know that that a lot of research is still predominantly coming from the universities. So having that, building the capacity to have community organizations leading is pretty key, I would say, if we're going to be moving towards this knowledge democracy. And just a final statement just about the powerful opportunities for students to be involved in experiential learning through community-based research. And I'm quite interested in this idea of CBR as an avenue towards creating global citizens, so towards a citizenship. Okay, I think that's all for my slides. I just wanted to point to my contact there. I'm happy to respond, connect with anyone by email and my website with some of my publications and YouTube channel where you'll find all of our videos. And I just finished 3 new ones from Kenya working on our waste participatory sustainable waste management one there. So some new resources there, and then also our UNESCO Chair open source repository that's based out of UVic. And yeah, I'll just end there and thank you all for listening, and I'll be open for questions.
Thank you so much, Crystal. That was excellent. I'm really looking forward to looking at some of these. As you
Great.
referenced, there is time for climate solution. I'll share a few words about CBRC while I'm doing that. All of the rest of you are welcome to the chat function to submit questions. Um, so while you're collecting your thoughts on that, I'll share that if you're interested in getting more involved with CBRC, welcome you to engaging with webinars. We invite you to continue webinars right now. Also welcome you to search by creating a profile on the website, which is on the CA. Third way to involve
It's quite hard to hear, but maybe that's just me. I'm not sure if you're speaking, Jessica.
not good. But the system is telling me it's good.
Oh, I can hear you now a little bit.
Not quite sure what the problem is, but those ways to connect are on the slide in front of you. There are CBR resources and training opportunities available on the website, and we invite you to be part of our biannual C2 Expo that's upcoming, and lots of forthcoming. And we also welcome you to be a CBRC member as an institution, a department, faculty, as a student. I'm not sure why the sound is giving us such problems. Crystal so well, but I will chat with you in the chat function, but we'll invite your questions.
Okay, I see one from Allison. So can everyone hear me? Possibly it's just from your end, maybe. Oh, yes. Okay. Thanks, Allison. A lot of valuable resources and projects to check out. I wonder if you can share how you may be able to get started with an institutional impact assessment. Good question. Definitely required some thinking to get started on that. It seems like quite a monumental task. Lots of meetings with different folks around campus. I met with quite a few of our deans and VPs and our institutional support folks there. So what we've done at UVic over the last few years, we have a new tool, and possibly there are similar reporting mechanisms at different universities, I would imagine, possibly similar to the yearly reports. So we have this new tool called the Enhanced Planning Tool at UVic, which was kind of an opportune moment for me to use. Within that institutional planning tool, there are two sections. One is specifically focused on impact to society and contributions. So I harvested those two sections from all of our 92 academic units. So I think when you're thinking about starting something similar at your institution level, to just see what's out there, what kind of data is already available. So we thought, well, let's use this data. It's not perfect. It's by no means consistent among the different units in terms of reporting and terminology. But we thought, well, let's use this as a pilot to start thinking about the ways impact is happening. And I've now been able to provide some feedback in terms of how we could be using the EPT data in a more structured way. There was a lot that what was not included because it wasn't reported in the right way, sort of thing. So, the pilot I did was really just a snapshot. It was not inclusive of all engaged research, but it did provide us a little bit of a picture, a little bit of a framework to start building. And, we're quite excited to be using the UN SDGs as a way to think about the impact of our work. We also did kind of mapping other indicators. So within our institutional structures, we had OCBR and ISIQ, which helped me isolate impact because there's just so much happening all across campus all the time. It's difficult to think about how to capture all of that in a methodologically rigorous way. So I think if you can find areas or pockets of opportunity within the university where data is already being collected, and then start to pull those together. But yeah, that would be, I guess, maybe where to start. Hopefully that's helpful. Let me just see from Prairie. For CBR in other countries, what differences have you noticed? Also, have those projects been spearheaded by local academic institutes? Wow, okay, great question. Lots of differences. I think there's different research traditions that come out of different regions of the world. Latin America has a very strong community-based research tradition. Actually wrote a really good chapter on that in, which slide was that book in? Number 8. Let me just pull that up so I can, slide 8. We actually did, nope, sorry, not 8. I just want to show you this book because it will, this one, The Knowledge, Democracy, and Action. There's a number of case studies here from around the world talking a little bit about the different CBR approaches. But as I mentioned, it's very diverse in terms of how it's being practiced, who is initiating, how universities are working collaboratively. So this is a very good book to have more information about those different kind of research approaches. And I've done a lot of work in Brazil, so I know there it's quite strong. And I think the civic mission of universities there is quite historically present, and I think that plays out in how the university responds socially in those ways. Let me just see. Have those projects been spearheaded by local academic institutes? Yeah, I think both from civil society, but also from the universities. So certainly it's difficult to respond on a global scale like that, but I would say it's certainly a combination. What kind of structures did you find to encourage long-term partnerships between researchers and communities? Good question. I've seen lots of different kinds of structures. I think certainly ones that have support, so actual funding for community to be equitably partnering. We know a lot of funding streams and sources are still predominantly coming through universities, and we're starting to see a little bit of that change happening, but it's still very slow. So I think structures where community organizations are having more access, more decision making in terms of coming together with academic, I think those really can be vehicles for stronger partnerships. And we've seen some structures like that, but I'd say it's really still predominantly coming through universities. Let's see here. Any further questions? Have I considered doing impact assessment at other institutions? I've certainly been emailed, and I've presented some of this work at Q Expo last year in Vancouver, and I was just recently at the Living Knowledge Network in Budapest, which is a fantastic network, living knowledge based out of, it's a European kind of coming from the science shop movement, which is another interesting structure, science shops. And also those have been becoming more popular in the United States as well, but also in Canada. So I've certainly been presenting this institutional assessment work, and there's been a lot of interest, and I think universities are wanting to think about how to assess this on an institutional scale. So I would definitely be open for supporting folks if they wanted to do that. I can provide some further information on that. What is a science shop? I see. Thank you, Jessica, for giving that. Basically, a science shop is, they can be very, very small. I know in some universities in Amsterdam, Germany, it's just one person running. I mean, a science shop, I think of as kind of like a, I don't want to say help desk, but an open space of the university to be partnering with industry, community-based organizations, local governments, where students are involved in those projects, and the research questions are coming from the community. So some are quite small, and some have quite a lot of staff, many students. So yeah, definitely have a look at that link that Jessica put there as well. These are great questions. Let's see. Any other coming through? Thank you, Crystal. This has been very interesting and helpful. Thank you, Ashley. I'm so glad. I think we'll wrap it up for now. Okay. Great. Well, thank you all for joining, and please be in touch if I can follow up on anything that was interesting today. So thanks so much.